we're going to be using LabVIEW, so first things first, we need to open the program and look around. Here on LabVIEW 2017, you might have 2018 or 2015, they're all about the same. Wait while it loads. First of all, LabVIEW is going to give you a couple of options. We would like to do one thing here. We're going to start with a blank VI. VI stands for virtual instrument, and we want to make a new one. We don't want a whole project, none of these things that end in LV, PROJ, no. We want a file name that ends in .vi. So a blank VI is where we're going to start. Now when LabVIEW opens up, it's going to pop up a bunch of windows. So let's go through them one by one and talk about what they are and what they do. We'll start with this first one. It's called the front panel. I like to drag it over here on the left, and I do often resize these windows so that I can see most of all of them at the same time, personally. So the front panel over here is like the user interface of your desktop computer. It is what the user is going to see without having to go through all of the back-end stuff that converts, I don't know, individual bits and bytes into the images that you see on your screen. It is where the user of your program can input data, and it's where the user can see the results of what the program does with that data. Associated with the front panel is this thing over here called the controls palette. It is where you can find any control or indicator that you would like to use on your front panel and drag them over. Let's go in here to numeric, and if you scroll down, you'll see all the different kinds of numeric controls or indicators. A control is an input, an indicator is an output that you might be able to use in your program. We'll start with the very plainest, the numeric control. I'm going to click and drag it over and just drop it on my front panel anywhere. If I click on the exterior of it, I can drag it around. I can move it wherever I want. If I click on the interior of it, I can change the number. If I click up here, this is the label for it. I can move the label around, though I don't recommend doing that. I recommend sticking it right there with it. I can change the label to students in class. I can use this toggle switch to change the number of students in class today. And I can right click on it and do many things. I can change it from a control, which is an input. You can see that I just changed the number to an indicator. I can change it to an array. I can replace it with something else from the controls palette. I can do a lot of data operations and advanced stuff, and generally we'll leave it there. So this control that I have here, you might have noticed that on my block diagram on the other side, something similarly named has popped up. I'm going to double click on this, and it brings me right over to the block diagram where I have a block labeled students in class. And if I change the name here, it's now kids in class, the name changes back on this one. These two are linked. The data from here, in this case the numeric number 8, gets transferred to the block diagram. And it's here on the block diagram that I can do something with it. Associated with the block diagram is something called the functions palette. The functions palette is very similar to the controls palette. I can resize it, I can change how it looks. I'm not going to do much of that. I am going to look for how I'm going to program this. So I want to take the number of kids in class and add, I don't know, the number of kids in the next class to it. So I'm going to come here to numeric, and I'm going to get an add block out. And I'm going to pull this add block over to the block diagram. You'll notice that this functions palette only appears when the block diagram is my active window. If I click back here on my front panel, the functions palette disappears and it's replaced with the controls palette. So let's go back here. Now, kids in class, and I'm going to add something to it. If I mouse over this block, this addition block, you can see up here in this fourth window, context help, what this block does. It takes an x in, a y in, and computes the sum, and your output is an x plus y. That's pretty basic and pretty easy. There are other blocks that are a little more confusing. What does multiply array elements do? Takes a numeric array and gets the product of everything in that array. These are pretty self-explanatory, but we can go into some very detailed definitions. There's an AND block, x plus y. Is it x and y? Is that true or false? It spits out a Boolean, true or false. There's an OR block. There's the exclusive OR, the not AND. If you are into Boolean logic, these are always fun to play with. Anyway, we'll close that Boolean one up and go back to our numeric. So, over here, kids in class, I need to wire, get my wiring tool, and I just clicked on the terminal of that one to the terminal of this one, and now the number of kids in class is wired in here. So this data will pass through that wire and go into this block to be added to whatever data comes in here. What data is going to come in there? Let's add it. Let's add another control. Let's add the adults in class. And there's 1 to get the total class size. Now I'm going to double click on this and it finds me the block. I'm going to wire from the output terminal of this block to the input terminal of this block, and my output will be the total number of people in the class. To get an output, it's coming out right here. This is the data, but how do I show it? I need an indicator on my front panel to show what that is. I can do this one of two ways. I can come back to my front panel, and right next to the control, there's an indicator. I can drag it over. Total in class. You can see slight differences. This control has a toggle on it, so I can control it. It has a white background to indicate to the user that you could input something there, whereas this indicator has a gray background and no controls. The only control I have over this is I can resize it. I could probably change the font if I wanted to. I don't really care that much. When I double click on this, it takes me to the block, and you can see a slight difference here. This block has a bold line around the outside, and this block doesn't. This block, these two controls have their terminals on the right-hand side, and this one, the terminal, is on the left-hand side, indicating that information needs to come into it, comes into it from the left-hand side. So I can do that. I can manually put an indicator on the front panel, or I could come here to this output and I could right-click and I could create an indicator. And it has created one here. It's already wired up. It is named the same thing as the output of this block. If you look in the context help, the output of this block was x plus y, and so they named this output x plus y. I can go through and I can rename that class total. And this is another indicator. If I double click, it finds it for me on the front panel. There. Now, to add these together, I need to actually run this program. So, 8 plus 1 should give me 9. So to run the program, I just click on this arrow. If it is a white arrow, the program is okay to run. If it is a broken arrow, your program has errors. Run the program, and here under class total, it gives me 9, but total in class still gives me 0. Let's look at that. It's because total in class isn't wired to anything. The wire from this output, I took adults in class and the kids in class, and I added them together, but the output only goes to this block. It does not go to this block. If I want it to go to the second block, I'm going to wire straight up to this wire, because that wire is what holds the data. Now you can see that I'm wired up, so when I run the program, now both of these should give me a 9. I can change these numbers, and it changes the output. So here are my inputs, my controls, and here are my outputs, my indicators. If you by any chance lose your controls palette or your functions palette, you can go to View, Controls Palette, and it pops up. So I can close it if I want to make more room on my screen. And to see it again on the front panel, View Controls Palette, and there it is. Same thing with the Functions palette. View Functions palette. And there it is. There's one more window I need to show you. View the Tools palette. The Tools palette is because every different piece of your program in LabVIEW takes a different tool. So here, in this open white space, I get a cursor tool. I can change that to a text tool so that I can type and write messages. I can operate values with this hand tool. It lets me go up and down and up and down. And I can change to the wiring tool so that I can wire things. What's easiest though is the automatic tool selector, so I can auto tool. If you need to see this again, View Tools palette is where the Tools palette came from. Context help, show context help. The Functions palette, View Functions palette. And from the front panel, View Controls palette to get the Controls palette.